And I can convey that because it's on public record after all, that Neil Duncan-Jordan abstained on the winter fuel payment vote. He opposes the sale of Poole Civic Centre. He opposed cuts to disability benefits, opposition which partly occasioned his suspension from the Labour Party, I believe, but thankfully the whip was restored last November. And he also happily favours the renationalisation of the water industry. And in short, I think you rather seem to share Labour International's outlook. And if we don't have policy aligned with all of the above, except for Poole Civic Centre, that is, I'd be very surprised. Today, you're presenting on the future of pension provision, a subject on which, having previously represented pension and workers' rights in unison, you will undoubtedly be exceedingly well versed. Reform, I understand, plan to abolish certain pensions for new public sector workers from 2030. The retirement age steadily rises, and the number of replacement contributions to finance it steadily drops. But Labour's pension schemes bill received royal assent, I believe, was it 3 days ago?
Actually, no. It's still going back and forth between the
Or
Lords and
was it?
yeah.
Oh, well, I accessed incorrect information there then. It was very muddled.
I
And at
think
one
we might
point
be voting next week on the last bit of it.
right, okay. And so we're going to hear all about it from you, I hope, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Frankie, and thank you to Graham for the invitation to address you. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour through both state and occupational pensions. So I want to start by just talking about where we are with the state of pensioner poverty in the UK. 1.9 million older people officially in poverty, and many, many more just above the official poverty line. And that creates a huge reliance on the state pension, not just for today's generation of pensioners, but for future generations as well. And Frankie, you mentioned about the pension schemes bill, which I will touch on a bit later. But the key understanding of pensions in the UK at the moment is that future generations from now onwards are certainly going to have less generous occupational pensions than pensioners of the past.
Yes.
The high watermark of the sort of final salary pension scheme is actually largely undone now. Even some public sector pensions are being scaled back from where they were previously in things like the Post Office, Royal Mail, for example, BT. If you joined in the 70s, you would have been on a decent final salary pension scheme. If you joined today, it's nowhere near as generous as the previous scheme would have been. So future generations are definitely going to be more reliant for the bulk of their income in retirement on the state pension, which then raises the issue about the current level of the state pension. State pensions in two forms. There's an old state pension and a new state pension, depending on which time you retired, and they're set at different rates. Most pensioners at the moment are on the old state pension, and they are on a lower rate than those who retired later on a higher rate of pension. One of the problems is that we then have a two-tier state pension system in this country between the old and the new, and that is seen as obviously disadvantageous for those who are on the old pension. The other problem with that is that the gap between the two widens every year because the triple lock takes the new pension up in total, but the triple lock only takes the basic state pension up in the old pension, and the second state pension, or SERPS as it would have been known to many people, state earnings related pension scheme, only goes up in line with CPI. So the gap between the two is widening over time. So the gap between the old and new pension is widening every year. So people on the old state pension feel aggrieved that the indexation that they're receiving is not as generous as newer counterparts, and that's absolutely clear. That brings me on to the triple lock generally. So it's ironic, I think, that it wasn't Labour that introduced the triple lock, but the Tories. And, that was after decades of campaigning by organisations like the National Pensions Convention, which I also used to work for, under the leadership of Jack Jones, the former Transport and General Workers Union leader who was my boss. And the need to restore the link with earnings, which was broken by the Thatcher government in 1979-80, had been a decades-long campaign, finally introduced by the Tories to restore the link with earnings, rather ironically. Now we find ourselves now, and I wrote about this very issue this week, we now have Labour backbenchers, Labour ministers and Labour peers saying that we need to end the triple lock to fund defence spending. And I wrote in the House magazine what a folly that would be if we were to do that. And the reason why, it's not about whether you think there should be spending on other things. We can talk about whether spending should come on other things and how we could raise that money. But it's such a short-term view that you can take away the triple lock and it won't have an impact. Of course it'll have an impact. We've still got 1.9 million pensioners in poverty. If you remove the triple lock, that number will undoubtedly grow. And then eventually you'll be forced to do something about it. So it's a very short-term issue, but also it's rather inaccurate in its portrayal of pensioners getting something that other people aren't getting. The state pension is the best form of intergenerational solidarity that we have in this country, because today's workers pay national insurance to fund the pensions of today's pensioners, just like today's pensioners paid when they were workers for the generation that was retired before them. This is an exchange of income between the generations that is a contract that goes on and on and on under our national insurance system. So arguments that older people are getting something at the expense of younger people is really just about time, because eventually those young people today will be older people, and the younger people of future years will be funding their state pension. So it's a complete misunderstanding about the way our state pension system works. I think people think it's an easy cash cow that you can turn to when you want money. Well, it absolutely isn't. It's income that people have earned through their national insurance contributions and working throughout their working lives, which is why they qualify for the pension in the first place. So to suggest that we can dip into that to fund more armaments is absolutely wrong. And I think, like I say, I wrote about that extensively this week in the House magazine, trying to put that issue to bed. I hope it will be put to bed. It also raises the other point, which I've majored on in the last 20 years in various careers that I've had, about the failure of means testing and the importance of universalism. So we've had means testing of the pension credit in Britain for well over 15, nearly 20 years, introduced by Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor. And what's key about means testing is that it never reaches the very poorest in society, because the very poorest are those who don't claim it, even though they're entitled to. And in Britain, at the moment, we've got somewhere in the region of about 750,000 to 800,000 pensioners who are eligible but don't claim. And the government's been incapable of finding those people and getting those people to claim the money they're entitled to. Previous governments also struggled to do that. So it's not a Labour problem, it's a problem of means testing. Universal payments, of course, reach everybody. You don't need to fill a form in. You just need to get the money owed to you in the same way that the winter fuel allowance was paid in that way. And I'll talk about that in a second. So having a higher basic state pension that goes to everybody is the way of making sure that even the poorest get what they need, rather than relying on a means-tested pension credit, which has basically failed to address the concerns of the very poorest in our society. Now, 3-4 weeks into the Labour government of 2024, I was sitting in the gallery when Rachel Reeves stood up and said she was going to means test the winter fuel allowance. That was the first we'd heard of it. Wasn't in the manifesto. It was one of the worst policies that we could have ever introduced because it has coloured everything since. You can't go out on the doorstep without people remembering it, even though a year later, 8 months to 9 months later, they reversed that largely, that decision. The damage was already done. And I'll be clear about my abstention. Bear in mind, this is 3 weeks into being a brand new MP. I didn't have an office. I didn't know where the toilets were. I was still getting lost around the estate. And I talked to a number of older, more long-standing MPs about what I should do because I wasn't going to vote for it. And they said to me, Neil, you've only been here 3 weeks, mate. I think you should, abstain. That's probably the best thing to do. I think if you vote against it, it could be very problematic. I'd already put down an early day motion opposing it, which the whips had tried to get me to withdraw, and I refused to do that. And I'll be clear, I abstained on the advice of older colleagues. If that vote were to come round now, I wouldn't be abstaining, I can tell you that. I'll be voting against it because I'm in a different place now than I was 3 weeks in. But it was absolutely the wrong decision, and we've suffered ever since. And one of the things that it brought up, that decision, was this stupid idea that pensioners on between £12,000 and £13,000 a year were well off, because that's the level at which the means test was going to be introduced. Well, it was introduced. 19,000 pensioners in my constituency lost that winter fuel allowance overnight, effectively. Now, some of them, the vast majority, would have got that back the following year, but they never made up for the gap of the year that they lost it. And the government argued, I remember Lucy Powell going at the dispatch box and on television. She wasn't the deputy leader then, she was the leader of the House, saying that there would be a financial meltdown if we didn't do this. I mean, that was absolutely ludicrous to suggest that we were going to go into economic freefall if we didn't penalise the poorest pensioners and take their winter fuel allowance away. Because economically, if everybody had claimed what they were entitled to under the pension credit, it would have cost the government more than they would have saved by taking it away from everybody. So it was completely economically illiterate. And what came over very clearly was that this is a policy that the Treasury mandarins had been trying to get through for years. They'd given it to George Osborne and he wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. And yet we did it off the bat within 3 weeks. And all the damage that's been done ever since. So it was a massive error of judgment on behalf of the Chancellor and the Cabinet generally to introduce that. And it did expose this crude and ridiculous thinking that £12,000 is a lot of money to live on. I mean, absolutely bonkers. Anyone who would have argued that, which the Cabinet did, completely out of touch with reality, completely out of touch with ordinary workers' lives. That then raised a couple of other issues. Firstly, we then had later votes on the WASPy women, which I voted to give them compensation for. I was only one of 10 Labour MPs who voted for that. The Ombudsman had been asked to look into it. The Ombudsman recommended compensation be paid. The government said it wouldn't do that. Again, another error, particularly when you remember that all those people, Starmer, Reeves, all of them were photographed with the WASPy women in opposition, holding placards, saying it's an injustice, they should get the money they deserve. And then when we get in, we say, well, no, we're not going to do that. That was just a stunt that we were doing. So again, it looks extremely bad on the pensions front. That campaign continues, and some of us are carrying on with that. The other issue around pensions that I wanted to bring up is about frozen pensions. So I've been involved in the frozen pensions campaign for a number of years before being an MP and since being an MP. This Wednesday, I hosted and chaired a round table of ambassadors from Canada, Australia, South Africa, the Falklands, and Pakistan to talk about the current and long standing, I think it's 50 to 70 years this has been a problem,
Yeah.
um, whereby if you go to certain countries, largely Commonwealth countries, but not all, if you leave UK and go to certain Commonwealth countries where we don't have a reciprocal arrangement in place, your state pension is frozen at the value it was the day you left.
Mm.
And that's an injustice. These people have paid in their national insurance. It should be uprated just like
Yep.
as if they were in the UK. And that's ongoing. And we had a very good round table, like I say, that I chaired. And there's a way forward of trying to get the government to do something on that. It's not Labour problem. All governments have resisted it. So it's not something that we said we were going to do and now we're not going to do it. But it's an area that we need to keep pressing. There are roughly about 500,000 affected expat pensioners. The bulk of them are in Australia and Canada, but smaller numbers are in all. 50, there's 100 countries, just over 100 countries that are affected. And it's bonkers that you can get it in America, get your up rating in America, but you can't get it in Canada. I mean, this is crazy. So that's an ongoing issue of pension justice, I think. That brings me on to the pension schemes bill that was going through Parliament recently, and I think, Frankie, I think there might still be some one or two votes left to do on that, but I could be wrong. It's been backwards and forwards a lot. I seem to think that we've got one more go at it, but anyway, I moved various amendments going through Parliament on various things, but the key part of it, which the Conservatives really didn't like, was the idea of mandation. So the fact that the government could mandate 10% of a fund's value into certain areas of investment. Might be green technology, might be housing, might be, whatever. And the Tories got up and argued that was all about the government taking people's money away. Well, it's not taking people's money away, is it? Because it's an investment, which, if it gets a return, will pay their pensions. It's not taking people's money away. It's money would be invested somewhere anyway. So that's a completely false idea. And providing the investment is sound, then people will make money out of it, and their pensions will be absolutely fine. So it's not that people might even lose any money. So I think that was a completely wrong approach by the Tories. My personal view is that, and this was one of the amendments that I put forward that didn't get through, was that we should be using the massive trillions of pounds worth of pension fund money in the UK to invest in things like green technology and affordable council housing. That's what we should be using that money for. This is workers' money that could assist other workers. And providing these investments are sound and they get a return, housing will always get a return, then that's a good use of that money, and we should be making that case. Because other pension funds, particularly in Canada, they'll invest in all sorts of things in this country. Their pension funds will invest in UK businesses all the time, and we can't. And I think that's a real mistake, and we do need more mandation. One of the other things that I raised, and I made a speech about this, I think it was last week last week, was about the need to end our reliance on investing in fossil fuels. Pension funds are still investing in things like thermal coal, which are a dead energy. Everybody knows that that's finished, and yet our pension funds are still investing in that, which is basically a suspended fund, which is not going anywhere. It's not a good investment, and we need to get out of those things. Put to one side the global climate issue, which of course is extremely important. There's no retirement on a dead planet, of course, and we accept that. But even economically, why would you want your money invested in an industry that's not going anywhere? So, I mean, we need to make the argument for that as well. Again, it wasn't accepted by the government, but we keep pressing these arguments. That brings me on to just a few other things in relation to sort of older people in particular, and the current situation in Iran obviously is concerning people about the cost of energy in this country, and how that's going to play out. The winter fuel allowance obviously links into that because that's part of the ways of mitigating against fuel poverty. Fuel poverty is still a massive problem in the UK, not just for pensioners, but for ordinary households as well, younger households as well. We desperately need a social tariff for low income households. We desperately need to uncouple ourselves from the oil prices so that our electricity is not set in line with those increases that we've seen recently. And we need to think seriously about those companies, those utility companies coming back into public ownership. We need to be in control. I've said this before about railways and the water industry. You can't control what you don't own. And that's a principle that we need to keep revisiting. And then linked to that, or not, although not to do with pensions, is to do with pensioners, is the issue of social care in the UK. Social care, I've been involved in social care campaigning for over 20 years. Over that time, we've had at least 20 reports and reviews into the state of social care. We know what's wrong with it. It's dominated by the private sector. It's very badly paid for the staff that are involved, and people are not getting what they really should. If you had cancer, you'd be treated through the NHS, which everybody would collectively pay for, and it would be free at the point of use. If you've got dementia, you're on your own and you have to fund that yourself. That's a differentiation between two illnesses, which I think is grossly unfair. Now, Labour's idea was to have a national care service, which I support, but I support it being like the National Health Service, which is funded through general taxation and free at the point of delivery. What the Labour government decided to do was set up another review. Well, we already know what that review is going to say, so they've kicked it into the long grass. That review is going to come out. Baroness Casey, Louise Casey, is doing the review, and that will come out in 2028. There's no way we're going to do anything this term of Parliament. No way. In 2028, the election will have to be by July 2029. So we've got no time to do anything. So that means that's a second term issue. Well, that sounds good if you think you're going to get a second term. It doesn't sound so good if you're not going to get a second term. And of course, I probably don't need to tell you that, you know, the polls at the moment don't look very good at all.
Yeah.
And the chances of us having a second term are pretty slim. So we've kicked social care into the long grass, just like successive Tory governments did. We've done exactly the same. We haven't tackled it. No one's tackled it. And that means an incoming government of a different colour will be left to try and sort it out. Well, I don't have any faith that Reform are gonna do the right thing by people who've got dementia or need social care. So we totally missed that opportunity. And when I talk about things like social care or cutting the winter fuel allowance or whatever, part of that is electoral. It's not only the moral thing not to do or to do, it's also about how it affects your chances of getting back in again. And, you know, if you want a second term, then you have to behave like you want a second term, and you have to have policies that the public like, as opposed to policies that they really don't like. And unfortunately, from winter fuel to disability benefits, to the WASPy women, to various other things, we have not always made the right judgment calls, in my view, on those issues. And that's why partly our poll ratings are so poor. In my constituency in Poole, in Dorset, I'm predicted to come third. Reform will take this seat. The Tories will be second and I'll be third. I mean, that's such a travesty, considering that I'm the first ever Labour MP to win this seat in the history of Parliament. And to see it undone so quickly not for anything I've done particularly, but because of the way we've handled this situation, is absolutely shocking. And John McDonnell was absolutely right when he wrote in The Guardian a few months ago that if this Labour government gives birth to a reform government, that's completely unforgivable, unforgivable. And that's something that we need to really take stock of. I'm going to finish, Frankie, on this. There are moves inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, which I'm involved in, to launch a new programme for change on the left, um, called Socialism 26, which hopes to set out a number of key policies that the government needs to adopt now, some more that they need to adopt by the end of Parliament, and then some more for the manifesto that we'll need in 2028, 29. Some of those include things like taking water back into public ownership and so on. And that will be released shortly, probably in the middle of May. We'll release details of that and people can sign up and give their support. They have to be a Labour Party member or a trade union supporter, but it will be online and people can add their support. We need to move into a different direction if we want to have any chance of either curtailing the numbers that reform might get or of trying to maintain our position in government at all. More of the same is not going to wash it, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not the only one, I'm sure, who thinks that. So, trying not to be pessimistic, trying to be optimistic that we've got a plan, we're going to try and do something. But hopefully that's given you a sort of rounded view of where we are on pensions and pensioner issues. But obviously, I'm happy to take any sort of questions that people might have about that or anything else.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, it ranged over all sorts of different issues, and indeed pensions connect to a lot of others. I'm sure everyone here will be most heartened to hear about Socialism 26. And perhaps at some point you'll be kind enough to come back
Absolutely.
and talk us through Socialism 26. I do have questions of my own, I always do, but I'm going to cede to the floor and hand over to Richard to chair. Thank you very
Okay.
much
No
indeed.
problem. No problem.
Pleasure meeting you.
Thanks, Frankie, and thank you, Neil, for as Frankie's already mentioned, really fascinating insights and a really brilliant overview of your work first of all, and of course the pension system as a whole. I think just before we go into the questions, maybe just very one briefly to you. How much time do you have today, just so we make sure that we we can get everybody in?
Good question.
If I can get away by 7 o'clock, that would be great.
Yeah,
7 o'clock. Oh, UK 7 is.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's us 8, so
it's
that's
20,
only 15 minutes.
it's
20 minutes.
No,
So
20 minutes. 20
yeah.
minutes.
Okay, super.
Okay.
Well, look, in that case, I think Sue, you had your hand up first, so
yeah, I've got at least
go.
three points to make. I'm not sure how many I'm allowed to put at a time.
Oh,
I'll start the first one.
There's a limit today.
I have a couple of specific things that relate to British citizens living and retiring overseas, which I think is appropriate for Labour International. And then I might have a general bring up a general point. Okay, so first one, winter fuel allowance, since you mentioned that. My understanding, thanks to news circulating around Labour International members, is that the government was wrong to restrict that to people resident in the UK, and that winter fuel allowance is actually a transferable, exportable, whatever the term is, benefit, and that we should be entitled to claim it, even if we are non-resident. So I've taken that advice and put in my claim just by the deadline. It wasn't easy to do. You can't do it online. You have to do it by post. So I managed to get mine posted from the UK and basically appealing against not getting my winter fuel allowance and waiting for replies. I'd appreciate your comments on how you see that. Is it actually a transferable benefit that all British citizens who would otherwise qualify due to age and so on are entitled to? Second point, about pensions from your employment rather than the state pension, you're entitled to a tax-free lump sum of 25% of your pension pot, or depending on the scheme. Mine is with USS. This is tax-free, but only in the UK. A lot of people do not realise that. If I were to draw my tax-free lump sum now, while I'm living in the Netherlands, it would not be tax-free, because under the pensions treaty between the UK and the Netherlands, all pensions income is taxable in the country where you live, regardless of where it comes to, what bank account it goes into, or what you do with it, where it comes from. So the Dutch pension people would get their grubby hands on it, and it would be taxed. Which is why I'm deferring mine until I can be resident in the UK again. And they don't like me for doing that. They're very cross with me, and they, in fact, they're not indexing my pension to punish me for not claiming it at the approved pension age, which I'm going to have a fight with them about. Anyway, so I'd appreciate your comments on those 2 points. I think they should inform us. The government should inform us better about the fact that your tax-free pension lump sum may not be tax-free.
Yeah. Okay. Can I suggest, Chair, that we take them all, and I'll answer them all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, get everybody in the 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go over to Andreas then. I think you've got one as well, and then I've got one myself as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just one pretty short question. I've just got my papers for the tax declarations in the United Kingdom, and in Leicestershire I saw in the forms. Okay, I must tell that I'm self-employed in UK. In London, and have to insert my profit in the tax forms. And beneath the profit field, they tell that you are not even entitled to pay contributions to the pensions if you're not over a certain amount of profit. In a rather cynical way that said this in the form, you have to have 8,000 pounds profit, and from then on, you can choose if you want, but below this amount, you're not entitled at all. I couldn't believe this, because in Europe, it's another case. You can pay from the first euro pensions, pension contributions.
Was that your only question, Andreas, or do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just wanted to change the system, that also the self-employed people of the United Kingdom are able to pay contributions, even if they have only a loss or zero profit, and they're not entitled at this moment by law.
Okay. Thanks, Andreas. Do you want to add your question there, Frankie, as the next one?
Yeah, I mean, there were, as you might have expected, several, but I was going to say one of the most important things is whether we can actually get in touch with you as being someone that might support us on overseas British citizens' rights, as Sue was indicating. We did, until very recently, when he died very suddenly and unexpectedly, have an overseas MP campaigner who also was going to be embracing frozen pensions and fuel claims. And also, I have to say that if you live outside Britain, you're not entitled to apply for pension credit.
No.
And for various reasons, which were not actually, I slipped through the net and don't have enough contributions for a full pension, and I get relatively little. That's not, but the main thing I'm interested in is making that point that that's another thing on overseas interests. So we have those 3 overseas interests here. And I once came up with, we had somebody from a pensions association supporting people with frozen pensions. And there is, I saw, a possibility of having a staggered introduction of unfrozen pensions, a staggered unfreezing of them, in other words, based on different priorities. So I do have an interest in that, particularly. And I think there is a strong connection also to be made between pensions and immigration. Because we have, as has Sanchez in Spain, made a point for that and released constraints on immigration accordingly. And I think that one of the main problems, though I shouldn't say so, isn't just the massive damage caused by measures introduced by Labour on fuel poverty. It's not just a massive damage to that they or foolhardiness. It's also a lot represents a staggering loss of Labour's moral compass. I'm getting on, and I joined the Labour Party. I started becoming active in the Labour Party when I was about 12. And I say to people that, our Labour Party is being undermined and taken away from us. And we want it back, thank you very much. And this is what my riposte to people who protest that I'm still in it. That's all I have to say. You don't have to spend much time answering me. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Frankie. Yeah. I have one question of my own, and I have to firstly disclose that I probably don't have as much of a vested interest in pensions as everybody, because I only worked a couple of years in the UK before emigrating to Germany, and that's where my future pension will probably be. But of course, one thing I have a concern of, looking into the future and 40 plus years when I would hope to receive my pension is just how sustainable are the current systems that we've got, not just in the UK, but in Europe at the moment. Obviously, the dependency ratio is something that's talked about quite a lot. How many pensioners are there to compare to the workforce? There's also, of course, the aspect of how long people are living after going into retirement, right, from 2 to 3 years when pensions were introduced to now potentially up to 20 years after going into retirement. I agree with a lot of your points about more actively directing investment to take some of the pressure off the tax-funded systems that we have, and specifically linking that then to investment in green technology, into potentially defence. All of these things that the government wants to do that we can kind of tie to these pension funds as well. But I'm curious generally on your thoughts of sustainability about the pension system as a whole, because I think for many people in my age, the thought is there isn't really an expectation that we're going to get much of a pension because everyone sees that the system is kind of heading towards collapse, to be frank. There is a feeling that, we've basically got to save up ourselves and invest in the markets ourselves if we want to expect to be able to retire at any point. I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on that and where you see things going.
Yeah, no problem.
Sue, did you want to come in with one last question there?
Yeah, if I can have a second bite of the cherry. Yeah, Neil, I wanted to come back at you on mandation.
Yes.
I know this is the subject of parliamentary ping pong at the moment, but the House of Commons tried to get it through. House of Lords amended it out, and the House of Commons has put it back in again. I hate to agree with the Tories on anything, but I think mandation is wrong. Not because pension schemes should be investing in fossil fuels and all these terrible things, but it's none of the government's business. There should be general constraints governing pension schemes and how they are run, and the way to get pension schemes to invest in sustainable alternative energy and the rest of it is not to mandate them, which is in conflict with fiduciary duty, but to ensure that pension schemes are accountable to their members, and then the members can campaign for divestment. And by the way, the Tories are hypocrites anyway, because they wanted to ban the local government pension schemes from divesting from Israeli companies and complicit companies. Unfortunately, they lost that one in court. So I am very much opposed to mandation. I'm very much for ethical investment and divestment.
I'll mute that. Right, so I can see Tim, you've got your hand up. I know you've just come in as well. So Neil, oh no, he's disappeared again. All right. In that case, we'll go over to you then, Neil, I think.
Okay, mate. No, thanks very much for those questions. It's good to have a chance to sort of go through them. So I'll go through them in the order that they came up. This is my understanding that the winter fuel allowance is is it used to be payable in Europe, I think. I'm not sure it was payable beyond Europe when we were part of the EU. I'm not convinced now that it's still available outside the UK. I'd have to check. I'm out of touch with that, so I don't know the answer to that specifically.
I'm butting in. I think it might be to do with the temperature of the country you live in, but
it could be, but I can't. Yeah, I can't be certain. It's some
I think
years.
that's what it is.
It's some years ago since I had to deal with that, but I can look into that. So that's that. In terms of the occupational pensions and the lump sum needing to inform people, I have to say I wasn't aware that if you drew it in another country, that you would be taxed in the country that you drew it in. So I wasn't aware of that. So yes, arguments about the government needing to inform people so that they're better prepared for that is certainly right.
It depends on the tax treaty between the UK and the country you're resident in.
Okay, so it's different for each one, I assume. Yes. So
yes, it could be.
Yeah.
I've only looked at the one for the Netherlands. That's quite
that affects you, of course. So that's an issue. I think I caught Andrea's point, which was about I think it was about self-employed people not being able to make national insurance contribution. I don't know if I've understood that right or not. I didn't. Yeah. The line was quite poor. I couldn't quite.
Yes, it's written in the text form that they are only allowed to pay contributions to the pension scheme if they are over the amount of 8,000 profits.
Yes. Yeah, I understand. I mean, we absolutely need to ensure, in my view, that people are contributing national insurance. National insurance is what pays for today's pensions, and paying national insurance is what then entitles you to a pension further down the line when it's your turn. So, I mean, having national insurance paid is extremely important. Again, I didn't quite catch it all. I'd have to look into that, and I apologise for that. Overseas pensioners' rights, you can't apply for pension credit outside the UK. The End Frozen Pensions campaign have calculated that to reinstate indexation from today onto people whose pensions are frozen will cost about 38 million. In terms of government expenditure, that's peanuts.
Yeah.
So it could be done, I think. That wouldn't give you a huge amount. I mean, if you had a very low pension of like 20 quid or something, having it indexed from tomorrow is not going to make your life so much better. But over time, future generations that retired would get the indexation going forward. So it probably doesn't help that many existing pensioners, particularly if you've had many, many years abroad. But it would, somebody retiring today to a country where, like Canada, for example, they'd get their indexation. So I mean, it would benefit them, and we have got to start somewhere. Absolutely. I'll come back to the moral compass right at the very end. I mean, Sue, we just have to disagree on mandation. I absolutely think that socialists need to make an argument for that, and that's my view. But I'm happy to have that discussion, further. We don't have time. But I mean, if we rely on, and this is a part of the speech I made, if we rely on voluntary action, we'll still see investment in fossil fuels because that's what we've still got.
Not if the members campaign against it.
Well, yeah, but you're putting the onus on somebody else, aren't you? If we made it the law, then it would be a lot easier, I think. We'll wait forever to convince some of these pension funds to divest, I think. We'll wait forever unless you tell them otherwise. That's my personal view. But I can see we disagree. The sustainability is a really good point from Richard. There was a book written about 20 years ago about a tick called the ticking time bomb, I think it was called, or something like that. And it was all about the dependency ratio. Actually, it's not, from my point of view, it's not about the number of workers to the number of pensioners. It's about how wealthy the country is. whether it can afford things. So I don't necessarily buy that argument that you have to have X number of workers and X number of pensioners, and that's how you fund the system. I don't think it's going to collapse, personally. I also think it's a myth that people are living longer. In fact, our life expectancy in the UK is falling, and it's falling particularly amongst the poorer members of our society. Health inequalities is massive in the UK, and it's something that I'll be doing more on in Parliament going forward. So I'm not convinced that there's a exponential rise of pensioners and fewer workers, because I don't think the number of pensioners is necessarily growing in the rate that people think. And I also think that it's not necessarily about the number of workers to pensioners, it's about how much money we've got in the kitty. And that's about how successful we are at growing our economy. So I don't think it's necessarily linked to actual numbers of people. It's about how much we can produce. The final thing is about the moral compass. And I think I'll leave you with this. Keir Starmer came to Parliament on Monday to give a defence of the Peter Mandelson affair. I asked him a question on Monday that it wasn't about process or procedure and who knew what or what bit of paper got passed between what department. For those of us who knew anything about Peter Mandelson, he should never have been 100 yards near a piece of paper that had his name on that was going to make him anything. That's the real error of judgment. It's not about what Ollie Robbins said or what a civil servant said or what anybody else said. It's the fact that we all knew that Mandelson was dodgy. He's got form as long as his arm. We all knew that.
Yeah.
So why on earth was he on a list? Well, he was on a list because Mandelson was part of the team that helped Starmer get elected.
Yeah.
And McSweeney and Starmer were good. McSweeney and Mandelson were very good mates, and you have to wonder whether that was payoff for the work that had been done for Starmer earlier on. They knew he was a risk, but he was our risk, and they thought that they could manage him, and they also thought that he'd get more out of Trump than it would cost him. And in fact, it's blown up in Starmer's face, and the Labour government generally is now viewed as, I'll tell you what it reminds me of, the last days of the Tories, when you couldn't see a newspaper headline without the word sleaze being written on it. And we've ended up in exactly the same place because we're still using the same old people because we think that they're on our side and they're going to do right by us, when in fact they're only really interested in themselves. Mandelson was well known to be in awe of wealthy individuals. You only look at his past, the Deripaska yachts that he was on and the holidays that he had and all the Hinduja brothers, all of that. It's all well documented that he was in awe of those people. And then to rely on him to be our man in Washington was such a mistake. And now you see it, and I see it on the doorstep when people say, well, I'm not voting for you because you're corrupt.
Yeah.
That's where the Tories were a few years ago. And again, we've ended up where we should never have been. And if you don't have, as Starmer has argued, there's no such thing as Starmerism, I think that's the problem. The government should be guided by principle and policy. And if you don't have a prism through which to put every decision, then you'll blow with the wind. And that's where we've ended up. That's why we have policies like the winter fuel allowance that the Tories wouldn't touch and we brought in. Why? Because we've got no principles against which to judge those policies. We've got no principles against which to judge whether Mandelson is fit to serve. We've given all that up.
Yeah.
And that's why we're in the mess that we're in. So we do absolutely need to reassert our values, our Labour values historically and progressively going forward. And we can't have more of the same. It won't be any good if Starmer gets replaced by another Starmer-esque individual. We have to have a change with this project. Otherwise, I fear that, the latest figures, I don't know if you've seen them from electoral calculus, put Labour are going down from 411 MPs to 63.
Yeah.
That's an existential crisis
Yeah.
for the Labour movement, which we just cannot allow to happen.
But somehow they don't seem to care.
Well, we have to keep going, in my view, to convince them.
No, I'm not saying that you don't care, or that the electorate doesn't care, but somehow the people making the policies in the Labour Party that are so unpopular don't seem bothered by the polls somehow.
Well, I think they have to look in the mirror, I think.
Is there anyone, sorry to interrupt, Neil, but is there anyone currently in, if you like, the running for that role, who would move things in that direction?
I mean, the obvious candidate is, of course, Andy Burnham, who's not a MP at the moment.
Yeah,
that's who most on the left, including the Socialist Campaign Group, think is probably our best bet. But he's got to come in first, and without that, I think it will be a choice between Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, possibly Peter Kyle, and even Al Cairns is being touted around. I personally don't like any of those options, but that's an individual view.
But Andy Burnham can't be got through onto a short list, can he? Because the cabinet can block this, can they not?
No, the National Executive can block it, but I think there are moves afoot to try and circumvent that. So it's still, Burnham's team say that they're still working on that. So let's see.
Okay, let's keep our fingers crossed. It's been delightful to have you.
Okay.
And I only wish, my sincere hope is that you will accede to further requests that I'm sure will be proposed to come back and talk to us again. Okay. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, Neil. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.